Hey, what's going on? It's Mike from Go Cell Phone Repair, and good to see you have joined already. That was what happens apparently when you dip your entire logic board in flux, and I guess just leave it there and let it dry up. So I'll talk about that a little more in the stream tonight. We have HTC about to unveil later this month their latest flagship phone. Will that get them back on screen, so to speak, for phones? I don't know. I hope so. I really do. An Apple Watch that was credited with saving a man's life? Yeah, really? I guess so. The LG V35 Thin Q. Change your Twitter password if you haven't done so already. At least you should if you don't want your account to be compromised. And after all, it is World Password Day. Also, Google is going to start blocking those annoying loud autoplay videos in Chrome, which I'm so excited about because I can't stand those things. Anyways, we'll get to that and more right after this. Hey, Johnny Chang, Greg M. Guys, Johnny, you asked earlier why the shocked emoticon. That was a picture of, that was a video that I'm working on of an iPad mini that came in. And when I lifted up the sticker, as soon as I opened it up, pretty much the entire lower end of the logic board was just swimming in flux. Like it was just still on there. And I'm not sure exactly what the backstory is. My understanding is it probably came in for a screen repair and then had the, pretty common problem of damaging the digitizer connection on the board because those things are super fragile. And I was going to point out in the video the difference between the digitizer connection and the LCD connection is that on the LCD connector you have a solid bar that goes right down the center, like all the way between where the inner points of those little copper pieces are. But on the digitizer there's nothing there. So usually if you pry it from the edges it's a little safer, but there's really no 100% safe way to do it, especially if you have to take the tablet apart several times. But in any case, this one was damaged along the way somehow, and I'm only guessing that probably what they did is tried to reflow the connection, and we know that term is usually not used. I don't know. It's probably not a good term to use, and it's usually not a good thing to do. But there's a perception out there that if you just heat things up, it's going to magically solve problems. And on that one, it didn't. And in addition to that, it actually got so hot on the board that the charge port connection on the backside, all those little connectors, pretty much just fell off. So the charge port was no longer connected. The battery was still charged. I got the digitizer connection replaced, cleaned everything up, plugged it in, and it did power on. So to my amazement, I'm really shocked that it survived. I had taken it out to look at the backside to see how far the flux had gotten, and the whole port wasn't attached. So obviously this thing wasn't going to charge very much after that. One pulled pad, but only partially. So there's still like half a pad on there. I think I can work with that. And if not, the good news is the jumper for that goes, right in that vicinity. It's not far away. So not going to be a problem, but just crazy because, with flux, the more you heat it up, the stickier it gets, the messier it is, and this stuff had definitely been heated quite a few times, but it was never clean, so it was just sitting underneath there, and that little pad that goes around where the connectors are, when I tried to lift it up, it just disintegrated, so it literally fell into pieces, and I assume that's because of all the heat that it was exposed to over time, heated and cooled down, and then of course it was pretty much saturated with flux. So anyways, that will be a success story, I think, within the next couple days. I'm actually waiting on a charge port to arrive because I didn't want to reuse the original one, but we shall see. Let's see. My camera's changing. Your skin tone tint to purple. You know something? I think that there may be something funny in my settings, and if this looks weird, I'm going to check really quick on my monitor. What happened, friends, is that I decided that it might be a good idea, just for the fun of it. I'm going to go and see what you guys are seeing here right now. I thought that I would start streaming on Twitch. And when I attempted to do that, things weren't working out, and I started fooling around with the settings on OBS, so I might have messed something up. I'll try to get that fixed. Also, I upgraded to a new version of OBS, so I guess you get to see me with purple skin for now until I can fix that problem. Carl Laterno, how are you? Flux is not conductive, so there was no short circuit damage. Yeah, there was no short circuit damage, but the thing about it is, with flux, even if it says no clean flux, it can still be corrosive. And one of the biggest problems you run into with flux is that, you know, they designed this stuff to be no clean, so you just put it on there, you heat it up, and you don't have to worry about later on having damage to the components or anything else inside the device. But that pretty much depends on the temperature that you reach when you're, you know, that all of the flux gets to. So there's a certain point in temperature that the flux has to reach where it dissolves anything that could you know, it kind of evaporates away anything that could be harmful. And in most cases, you've got flux that is kind of obscured by other things that you're working on inside of the device. So you may have a little flux underneath some components, and if it doesn't get all of that heat, or it leaks out to surrounding areas where you're really not getting it up to temperature enough, that flux is still going to be corrosive over time. So for the most part, we want to get all of that out of there as much as possible. And that was my concern with this one, so I wasn't sure how long it had been sitting. You know, it usually takes quite a while, so I don't think it's going to be, you know, a matter of days or weeks, but probably over the time span of a few months, if you've got flux in there that hasn't been heated sufficiently, it will end up being corrosive to the components inside the device. So that one could possibly come back. But good news, I got it all cleaned up, and as soon as that video is done, I'm going to publish it. I want to show you the before and after because it's quite dramatic. And I'm really happy that this thing even powers up at this point. It had a number of problems in it, but I think it's going to be, again, a successful ending to that story. So our mic had one of my subscribers had asked about Nokia, and I want to do, you know, I want to come back to this a little later on and go more, you know, deeper into what's going on with Nokia, because we always wonder, you know, what's going on with all these phone companies, especially when it looks like we're going to be losing quite a few of our choices when it comes to anything that's imported from China. At least that's the impression that we're getting right now. So I wanted to check in on Nokia, see what they were doing, and this article happened to be published today. It's about the Nokia 6.1 that runs on Android One and arrives in the US for $269. So you will be able to buy it here stateside, and it is going to definitely be a mid-range phone, and not to anyone's surprise, I think. It sounds like they're going to kind of focus on the camera. That's one of the things that we've you know, gotten used to with Nokia, is that they do tend to, you know, if other things are missing, at least they usually have a pretty decent camera. So they're talking about it arriving this weekend after launching in China back in January. So it's not like it's brand new, but it's going to be new to us. It's going to look a lot like last year's model. It has a 5.5-inch 1080 display, 16:9 aspect ratio. Rather than adopting the bezel-free that's come to more and more phones, the bezels do appear to be narrower, and the fingerprint sensor has been moved to the back. So ultimately, I guess all smartphones are going to look about the same, and your choice will be, do you want to get something that has iOS, or do you want something with Android? And then if you're in that Android category, you'll have a few more choices, I think, although Apple's kind of expanding their line. It seems like they've reached the point where, you know, offering one model to their customers, you know, they've saturated that market. You know, the people that are going to buy whatever it is, as long as it's from Apple, they've got phones. Now you've got to start looking at other people who want different form factors, something smaller, something bigger, you know, maybe one with the glass back and one with wireless charging and one that doesn't. I don't know. We'll see. But back to this, interesting, it's got a 630 processor, Snapdragon, of course, 4 gigs of RAM, USB-C charging, and that's opposed to the prior 430 processor, 3 gigabytes and micro USB. So cool to see that they are going to USB-C. And again, as we said, it is going to be a mid-range phones, but they have increased the price a bit because the prior model was $229. This one you're looking at $269. And of course, you can get it cheaper if you look for the right advertising, but basically they've jumped this up quite a bit. Flex, sorry, I missed a comment here about the Flex underneath ball chips wearing for when that chip heat up enough to melt the balls. Yeah, waiting for when it's hot enough to heat the balls. Yeah, well, hopefully you don't have enough heat that's going to actually melt the solder that's inside the phone. But yeah, if you've got little pieces of flux floating around in there, and the thing that we saw, and actually, it was really funny. I watched a video on the iPad Rehab channel where she had talked about rebuilding the entire iPhone 6 backlight circuit because there are stray solder balls in that vicinity, you know, and this obviously goes back to the time when it was manufactured. Some of these things, for whatever reason, something to do with the process that they were using, allowed excess solder balls to just kind of infiltrate that area inside the phone. And wouldn't you know, like a week later, I was working on an iPhone 6 backlight, and I found exactly that. I think I might have even showed you guys the video earlier. But yeah, iPhone 6, I'm going to say rebuild the entire circuit if you get to that point. Is Nokia a separate company from Microsoft by now? Yes, as far as I know, Nokia is completely has nothing to do with Microsoft. So it is actually, I want to say HMD, if I remember correctly, but let me look it up. I don't want to give you the wrong information. So yeah, it is operated by HMD Global, the exclusive licensee of Nokia phones and tablets. So yeah, nothing to do with Windows, and we won't see a Windows phone, probably not from Nokia. Although that was my favorite phone, honestly. But whatever, they don't have the apps. Microsoft doesn't seem to care much about an operating system for mobile phones, so I think it'll be a long time, if ever, if we see them come back. Nokia is not a woodpecker. Nokia is knocking on Android's heaven door. Yeah, so I believe that these are all running Android at this point, as far as I know. And 1001 Noisy Camera says, yes, it is HMD Global of Finland. Many former Nokia employees that uses the name of phones now. I know you're directing that comment at Johnny Chang, but I'm sure other people will find that useful. And that is an interesting thing. You know, Nokia at one point became the #1 manufacturer as far as quantity goes. You know, as far as handsets on the market. They overtook Motorola back in the 90s, and then since then they built, you know, pretty indestructible phones for the longest time. And then I don't know what happened. They just kind of Microsoft got involved, and things did not get better. It's funny that the SD630 is slower than the Snapdragon 625. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, hey, R-Mike, I want to go more into Nokia later because I've got a few things I want to cover tonight, and I won't have enough time to really delve into that. But I am interested in watching what happens with that company. You know, they certainly, as Noisy Cameras pointed out, they've got a lot of the employees from Nokia. They've probably got a lot of the experience and a lot of the information that originally came from Nokia, who was a big player at one point in time. So it would be great to see them come back again, especially if we're not going to be able to really see a lot of representation of Chinese phones, because that diminishes the variety that we'll have available to us, you know, as consumers in the US. So the fact that Nokia, we're still on good terms with Nokia apparently, and we're not worried about them spying on us, I guess, and they're going to be selling their handsets in the US. So hopefully that'll give them something to shoot for, you know. To do something here. My goofy prepaid Nokia Windows phone is still alive and kicking. You know, man, my Nokia 1020, I know I keep coming back to this, but that was pretty much my favorite phone, I think, of all time. And unfortunately, the camera on that thing died, and it would not come back, and they're not offering updates on it anymore. So I just kind of, I almost bought a new one, and I thought, well, if the same thing happens, then what am I going to do? So for that reason, I got rid of it. But I love the fact that they had no home button. You know, for the longest time, you didn't have to worry about that. The camera, obviously, just phenomenal for its time, even compared to today's phones. And the number of, you know, the access that you had to settings, if you wanted to go in there and tweak things photography-wise. The phone came loaded with 2 stock apps where you could change every single setting on the camera, which is, you know, in contrast to something like, for example, my iPhone, where, you know, it's point and shoot. There's not a whole lot you can do when it comes to white balance, aperture. You know, there's all these different settings that you had on the Nokia, and you could go in there and you could dial things in exactly the way you wanted it. And, you know, simplifying things certainly works, I think, for the majority of your customer base. So that makes sense. You want to give someone a device that's easy to use. But if anyone wants to, you know, go beyond that, or if you have power users out there, that's probably why they often opt for Android, I think, over iOS. But that's not the majority of the market, so that makes sense. Nokia phones can be killed only by beheading, as with the Highlanders. That's right. And someone once said that, what was that old Nokia candy bar phone? You remember the one that was just like super rugged? And they said that it once dropped from, you know, when it first fell to Earth, that's when the extinction of the dinosaurs took place. And the phone was still working, of course. So I can attest to that. Those things were pretty hardcore. So what else is going on? We have HTC about to unveil the U12, or whatever it's going to be called, or U12 Plus. And I am, as much as I am a critic of HTC, because I think they've made a lot of bad choices in the past, I would love to see them come back with something that we use and we enjoy, because they just haven't been able to hit their mark when it comes to handsets. I mean, they make these amazing looking phones on the outside. And in fact, yes, there was a Windows HTC. I think it was the there were a couple actually. There was the 8X and there was the M9, was it? I believe, that were Windows phones. But Beyond that, they never were really able to reestablish themselves. After, I don't know, 2012 or so, it seemed like everything started going downhill. So this may be their last shot at it. We'll see. I shouldn't say that though, because it seems like HTC is doing very well with their VR stuff. So, the company overall, I think, is alive and well. But when it comes to handsets, the real question is, can HTC get back in the game? And I'd like to see that competition happen, especially now. I keep mentioning this also, but if all these Chinese manufacturers are going to be squeezed out of the picture, then there's less competition, and that means Samsung and Apple and who else? Who else is going to get in the arena? So I hope that we have quite a few. Let's see, HTC used to be one of the giants of the Android world, but in recent years has lost ground to competitors, Huawei, ZTE, and OnePlus, at least two of which we probably won't be seeing very much of in the near future. So this is a Taiwanese company. The Taiwanese company has serious competition on its hands from LG and OnePlus. Really? I am skeptical about that statement. So you're telling me that LG and OnePlus are going to be the worst competition that HTC is looking at? It doesn't sound like it'd be that tough to at least compete against those brands. We shall see. Now, unfortunately, Huawei no more, it looks like, and same for ZTE. And ZTE really kind of brought that on themselves. If they had an agreement that they weren't going to sell any American-made chips to Iran, and they did, well, you broke the rules, so you suffer the consequences. The one that baffles me is trying to kick Huawei out of the U.S. completely, and I am a little suspicious as to where the influence for that comes from, but that's just my paranoid brain working overtime. I suppose in the future we might know, the real story behind that, but it's quite interesting that we have the elimination of Huawei and ZTE from the U.S. market under the pretense, at least partially due to warnings that say, watch out, these vendors might be building some sort of spying mechanisms into their phones. They might be able to spy on you from China somehow. Chinese government being affiliated with at least one of these manufacturers. So, okay, I thought if you weren't doing anything wrong, you didn't have anything to worry about, right? See, that statement only works on one side of the argument, so whatever. But be that as it may, we've got, let's see if I can find this here real quick, because I wanted to compare these two things that I thought were quite interesting together. I'll come back to that in a minute, Here's a preview. At least there was a thing on here talking about how, gosh darn it. All right, we'll have to get to that when we get to it. But talking about how we want to get ZTE and Huawei out of the U.S. market because of spying, and right under that article there was a discussion about how the Trump administration is pushing very hard to build backdoors into phones so that they can increase their surveillance here. So again, it's kind of like pick one or the other. Do we want to have security built into phones, or do we want that security to be easy enough to break into? Obviously, for the right reasons, if we're trying to track down criminals, that works. But if you're a company who's trying to sell a phone and saying that the security is strong enough to protect your customers' privacy, that's going to be a big problem when we start learning about things like Gray Shift or Gray Key or whatever it is that, pretty much has hacked into at least the iPhone's operating system. So anyways, I want to go over that a little bit more because I have some other tabs here opened up that we'll get back to. Let's see. Backdoors can be only hardware implemented as with Spectre and Meltdown unintentionally. Can be only hardware implemented. I still own an HTC Desire 601 backup phone because it's in working condition, albeit slowed down by the lack of upgrade. Hey, that's cool. Just I hope you don't break it because they're not fun to work on. And the Desire I remember specifically was a goofy one. You can fix them, but they like to act up every once in a while if you replace the screen. So maybe Nokia can buy HTC and revive them. That might not be a bad idea, and they should be able to get them at a good price, I would say. Hey, what's going on, Joshua Patrick? Good to see you here. We used to call the bar phone from Nokia the ballerina shoe. Why? The brick with Twitter and Facebook. Yeah, I wanted to get also to another thing here on Twitter here in just a second. So, an Apple Watch was credited with saving a man's life, if you can believe it. Now, of course, when I saw this, I imagined it's got to be clickbait, right? Come on, your Apple Watch. It's got to be some fanboy talking about how much he loves Apple and they saved their lives. Kind of like when people say their dog dialed 911. Maybe that happened, but I'd love to see it on, I'd really like to see it happen on video, or, how would you... I guess anything's possible, right? So I shouldn't be so skeptical. However, there was a gentleman, 32-year-old, allegedly, according to Fortune, William Monzidelis, became dizzy and started bleeding all over his body. I don't know what this means. Started bleeding all over his body. I don't know what that means exactly. But long story short, his watch told him that there was something wrong. So your Apple Watch and many other smartwatches will monitor your heart rate and who knows what else. I don't know if they do blood pressure yet or not, but the watch gave him a warning, told him to go to the hospital. He did, and they said that by the time he got there, he had lost 80% of his blood. Okay, that part of the article I'm a bit skeptical about, because I think if you lose 80% of your blood, you're probably dead. I don't know, maybe. At least you're close to death. So anyways, it turns out that this guy had an ulcer. Let's see if I can remember what type it was. It was some sort of ulcer. It was an erupted ulcer, and that, I don't know exactly what that means, but he needed a blood transfusion just to have surgery to correct it. So apparently, had his watch not warned him that he was losing a whole lot of blood, and I would assume that has to do with either heart rate or blood pressure, he might not be here today. So again, according to this article, the Apple Watch saved his life, and there was another reference to an 18-year-old woman whose resting heart rate jumped up to 160 beats per minute. That's opposed to like 70 or 80 in a healthy person. She rushed to urgent care, and they told her that she had kidney failure. So this is kind of cool. We talk about what technology can do for us. If a smartwatch can save your life, that's awesome. Obviously not everyone has a smartwatch, but if you do and it saves your life, that's impressive. I'm really, I am shocked and surprised, and good for him. Let's see. He hadn't noticed the bleeding, but noticed the watch alarm. Yeah. Again, there are some things about this article that I question, so I'm gonna continue to say allegedly. This is according to Fortune. Links to these articles down in the video description within the next 24 hours at the most, because I want you guys to check them out yourselves and see what you think. But this is what they're saying, and this is Fortune, which is somewhat reliable. I mean, nowadays it's hard to know what news you can believe and what news you can. Armike said, my wife and her friend's Apple Watch give false alarms occasionally. That's great. Wouldn't that suck, though, if you have high blood pressure or maybe suffer from anxiety and your watch starts telling you that there's something wrong when there isn't, and then you get more stressed out and just go into a vicious circle there, and then your heart rate increases? That sucks. I bet the guy was a vampire and he's just having an indigestion after dinner. Could be. Maybe he was just hungry for more. Yeah, this is good points. So again, all of this probably taken with a bit of skepticism. But again, if it's true, I'm impressed. All right, more new phones. We have the LG V35 Thin Q, likely to be LG's or AT&T's LG phone. So this is the official render, apparently, of the LG V35 Thin Q. Not much in the way of bezels. We do have a small bezel at the top and the bottom there. And it says a render, so I don't know if this is really completely what we can expect to see when it hits the market. But it further confirms, allegedly, the existence of the V35 Thin Q. Also reinforces some of the features already stated. Dual rear cameras, 18:9 aspect ratio, the latter of which led to the suggestion a V35 Q would not include a notch like the G7. Good news. I mean, I don't know. I guess notch or no notch, not a big deal, but I'm at the point now where I want to see some Android phones without a notch, just because I don't know. Personally, I'd opt for not the notch, but if the phone came with the notch and I like the phone, I don't think it would really affect my buying decision. What about you guys? Is the notch even a big deal? Let's see, what else do we have? A 6-inch QHD plus OLED full vision display, 80% screen to body ratio, 32-bit hi-fi quad DAC, and an emphasis on artificial intelligence capabilities of the phone, along with premium glossy finish in a choice of black or gray. 16 megapixel cameras on the back, it looks like. No notch in sight so far, they're saying. So, I don't know. We shall see. I hope LG does something that helps improve their track record. They're obviously recovering from a multitude of problems. Not the least of which was boot looping issues, which suck because in many cases you end up losing your data on the phone, or you just go to use it and you don't have a phone anymore. So we shall see. I hate to say it, I'm skeptical about the future of LG when it comes to phones. So I hope that they figure out what they're doing. It still seems like they're trapped between premium and budget phone. So they're kind of doing mid-range, but they're not really doing it as effectively as they might. Really sad because they did make some pretty cool phones, but they all seem to suffer from what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't look like they spent a whole lot on the components that are on the inside. I could be wrong about that, but that's the impression I get. Hopefully LG does something exciting soon. LG can make more money with ThinQ protein bars. That would, they probably should license that name and sell it. Until when there will be no more carrier exclusive models that get no more value after you fulfill your contract with them, cannot be compatible with other carriers, even when unlocked. The thing about these branded phones, when they're carrier phones, one, you almost always get stuck with a bunch of bloatware that it's difficult to remove, especially if you can't get root on the phone. So anytime I buy an Android phone, I buy the unlocked version. I don't want to be stuck with any of the carrier branding stuff again. But I saw something interesting recently. There is one phone, I want to say it was a Samsung actually, where it was unlocked, and whatever SIM card you put into it, that's the branding you get on the screen when it wakes up. So if you've got an AT&T SIM card, you reboot the phone with the AT&T SIM card, you see the AT&T splash screen. If you've got T-Mobile, that's what you see, and so forth. So that was kind of cool, especially for, what was it? I want to say it was Samsung. I'll have to go back and double check that. Maybe LG need to change OEM companies for their manufacturing. Maybe, but that's kind of what they do. I think really what probably earns the most for LG is their screen manufacturing, because that's what they do well. They sell to a number of different vendors, including Apple. So hopefully they're doing well on that part of it. But as far as the other internals, yeah, they might want to look elsewhere. Although most of these guys are buying their components from other places anyways. Qualcomm, Microsoft, and what's the other one? I'm going to go blank on it right now. Real quick though, here's a couple things. You might want to change your Twitter password. Apparently, Twitter has been storing passwords without any hash. Let me see, make sure that I say this correctly, because I'm certainly not an expert on this topic. But what they were doing is storing passwords through a process called hashing, using a function known as bcrypt, etc., and so on. Well, apparently these passwords were not being stored with the hashing, so they were just plain old passwords being stored on their system. No reason to panic and think that everyone's Twitter password has been compromised, but certainly a good idea to go in and update your password if you have a Twitter account. Certainly never a bad time to do that. And this happened to fall exactly on, guess what? It's World Password Day. I didn't even know this was a thing, but apparently, if you look at these calendar sites, every single day is a holiday. Today is World Password Day, according to the Registrar of National Day Calendar, or they've designated the first Thursday in every May to be National Password Day, which is funny because you could probably spend half of your day updating all your passwords and then recovering the ones that you don't know in order to update them, which really is the one that kills me, because I'll be logged in on a device, don't know what the password is, need to change it so that I'll know what it is so that I can log in on another device, and it wants me to input the original password even though I'm already logged in. I understand that's a security measure. If someone grabbed your phone and you were already logged into something, that would allow them to change your password without knowing what it was. I know, I understand that, but it really kills me when you can't enter your password, you can't change your password, and the recovery option doesn't work. I just ran into this a couple days ago. I don't know if you're familiar with this app, but I used something called GroupMe, which is kind of a group chat application that you put on your phone. I'm logged in on this phone, which I've gone back to because I cannot get the recovery to work. I forgot what the password is. I'm trying to log in from another device, and that thing where you have them email your password hint to you or password reset or whatever, it doesn't work. So it doesn't go to my junk mail. It doesn't go to my spam. It doesn't go to my inbox. It doesn't go anywhere on the email account that's registered with my username. So I cannot recover that password. but yet I cannot change the password because I don't know what the password is. The only option is to go back to my device that still has the application installed, and luckily I'm still logged into it. Otherwise, just make a new account, I know, but you can imagine how difficult that is when you have something important that you need to get into and the recovery for the password isn't working and you don't know what your password is. Very frustrating. But to go and change all your passwords in a day, good luck. I have about, I don't know, at least in the 100, I want to say. I've probably got at least 100 different passwords, and man, that would be quite a bit of work. J7 Perks was like that out of the box, generic and with no branding when unactivated. Yeah, I like that. Greg M just changed Twitter word. Too bad LastPass saved the change to the wrong Twitter account in LastPass vault. Oh, that's great. Unless this was part one of the disclosure, then a few days later they said, oh, some may have been stolen, viewed, and a few weeks later, even more than estimated got stolen. Okay, great. So thank you for that info, Noisy Cameras. I was not aware of that. This article, I want to say, was dated 1 hour ago, but apparently it is already behind, and that's what happens with technology. So, okay, definitely going to change that password, though. I need to do that. Now, instead of my password being password off, to change it to like password 1 or password 123 or something like that. I'm kidding, obviously. My passwords are ridiculously complicated. That's probably why I can't remember them. And when you always get that prompt that says, when you make a new password, choose something that's easy to remember and hard for other people to guess. Well, that is... That is a, wow, I just went blank here. That is a contradiction in itself. Something that's easy to remember and hard for other people to guess? Well, I don't get that. In any case, grub me. What? If you have 2FA enabled, they do not ask for the 2FA code when you update your password on Twitter. Only when you log into the account is 2FA code requested. Interesting. Hey, what's going on? Tech for your needs. Oh, you're speculating. Okay, thank you. So let me correct that. What I just said a minute ago was Noisy Camera speculation about the nature of disclosures in varying degrees of damage control. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. So far, what we know is that you should change your Twitter password, and it probably wasn't compromised, but then again, you never know. And they may come out later and say, oh, in fact, a few of those did get away. So good point. Thank you, Google. Thank you, Google, for blocking annoying autoplay videos in Chrome. Okay, so if you don't already know this, I love this option. Let's see, you guys can't see it, but if you right click on any tab in Google, you can hit an option that says mute site, and Google will save your preferences, or you can see it on the screen there. So if I scroll down here to mute site, I can mute this entire domain anytime I go there. It's never going to start autoplaying loud anything in the window, which I love, because all these, it's one thing to have a pop-up blocker, an ad block, or anything like that installed, but on some of these, you really have to go like no script at all. Otherwise, they find a way to get around it. So Google apparently is going to start allowing Chrome to remember your preferences. So it's not going to be 100% accurate. Occasionally, you'll find yourself on a site that's automatically playing audio. You'll have to go in and manually mute those, and you might find some that are muted by default, and you'll have to unmute them in order to hear what they're playing. But overall, I think this is a good idea, because what it's going to do is use your browsing history to determine which websites it thinks that you want to hear and the ones that it thinks that you don't want to hear, and kind of automatically adjust for you, so you don't end up going to these websites where they have some annoying thing blaring in the background, which is really just, it makes you not want to go back to that website anymore. But obviously, sometimes you get a blind link or anything like that, and you end up going back to someone who is guilty of doing that to their customers, which sucks. So the latest update, version 66, includes autoplay video changes that stop Chrome from automatically playing videos if the sound is on by default. Google is gradually rolling these changes out in a personalized way so that Chrome learns user preferences of which sites should and should not be blocked. So that'll be a cool thing to have on your browser if you're using Google. And I really feel bad, because I don't feel like people shouldn't be able to have advertising on their pages. Obviously I'm getting some value out of reading an article or visiting a website. They should be able to display ads. They should be compensated for generating the content that these advertisers are paying to be shown on. It's the few that just go overboard and plaster, especially if you're on mobile. I can't tell you how many times I go to a site, through my phone's browser, I can't even read the content because it's just wall-to-wall ads everywhere. So, there's a good argument for using an ad block, but at the same time, it kind of sucks because the people that are generating this content, if they don't get paid, there's no incentive for them to continue, and what we end up with is a bunch of clickbait websites. So, for what it's worth, I like this. Firefox has mute tab for granular control. Cool. I do actually use Firefox on occasion. It's kind of funny, but I've got some websites that work great on Chrome, some that work better on Firefox, and I prefer to view on Firefox. And believe it or not, I've got at least one site that I have to use Safari on because nothing else seems to work consistently. It's the most bizarre thing ever. And I don't really love Safari, but it's the one that works there. However, still don't know anyone who prefers Internet Explorer, at least so far. And other than using it to download another browser as soon as you install your operating system, that seems to be its main function at this point. Firefox is more overhead when playing videos from sites like YouTube. Chrome has it more streamlined and fluid. Firefox is leaking memory no matter what they do. Wall-to-wall jumpy ads. That's what kills it. I can't stand, come on, you can't really think that someone wants to return to your website if there are so many ads there that you can't even get to the content that they're teasing in the first place. CNET is bad for autoplay videos. I'm going to take your word for that, Greg. I think I've got ad block on the majority of these websites when I get there, so that I probably blocked them out a long time ago for that very reason. Unless you're paranoid about security, to let go Firefox, but Chrome or Chromium is better at playing multimedia websites. Okay, so next thing here real quick. And by the way, I wanted to mention two things. One, I'm going to end the survey or the poll that we did from last Thursday. That was about whether or not Apple should help Linus. And last time I checked, and that was today, it was 60-40 saying, 60% saying Apple should not help Linus. And I suspect that a lot of that came from people going to his channel, seeing what he's doing and saying, you know what, this guy in particular doesn't deserve to have a manufacturer go out of their way to help him. He purposely tore down his computer. He physically damaged it. He caused more than one problem. He did there's the impression probably that he did a lot of this because he wanted to create a YouTube video calling out Apple so that he could get a lot of views, which he did. So it's understandable that a lot of people are saying, no, don't help him. You're on your own. You broke it. You did it on purpose. You took it apart. It is what it is. So, I can't say I disagree with that. I was kind of on the fence myself. I think that Apple, to save their reputation, it would make sense for them to offer him some sort of solution. And at the same time, if you're purposely damaging equipment in order to create a video to get views, then obviously most people are going to be biased when they watch what's happening and kind of vote against that. So at this point, it says 6 out of 10. Thumbs down. Don't help Linus. Let him figure it out for himself with his $10,000 iMac. So, yeah, I guess maybe that's what's going to happen. What's going on, John Cassidy? Still a lot of Apple fanboys on YouTube. Absolutely. One might even argue the majority of YouTube viewers at this point, considering how many iPhones are in circulation, you might suspect that most, probably more than 50% of the people who watch YouTube are doing so on an Apple device. So that would certainly create some bias there, but it is what it is, right? That's what they say, whatever that means. Now, have you guys seen this? This is pretty cool. So if you remember, like about a week and a half ago, they caught the Golden State Killer, and this guy had been no one knew who he was since like back in, I want to say it was like the 70s. He originally started out as like a breaking and entering level of crime, and they called him the Visalia Ransacker, and then he apparently graduated to murder and rape and I want to say kidnapping. And really this case went unsolved for quite a while. Well, they tracked the guy down, and the crazy thing about this, which is just really amazing, technology. Here's what happened. If you don't already know the story, they had DNA evidence from the crime scene, but they didn't match anything that was in the criminal database. So they tried to match this up, figure out who this person was, and there was no match. Well, they went to a DNA website, the ones where you can like spit in a glass and you send it in, they figure out who your ancestors are. And then you do the same thing with another website and you get a different match. They say you should do it at least 2 or 3 times because there is a certain level, or there is a certain margin for error on those. But what they did is they took this guy's DNA and they cross-referenced it with the database that's on this DNA website, and it didn't match to find him, but what they were able to do is find close enough matches of his relatives. So his relatives' DNA matched the DNA at the crime scene close enough so that they could narrow this down, figure out here's the family of this murderer, and they started looking at who they were related to, and they built some profiles based on that, said that this person would have been this age at this time, they were in this area and so forth, and that's how they got this guy. So it wasn't his DNA, it was the DNA of his family. They created, a profile, got some suspects, and I would assume, probably dug through the trash can or something, and eventually found this guy's DNA, figured out who he was, and got him. He's like 72 at this point. Let's see. I want to say he's 72. Yeah, he's 72 years old. Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer living in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento. So it's exciting, that when we use technology for the good of the people, we can do this kind of stuff, and that this guy will get what's coming to him. Although, really at 72, he doesn't really have enough time in his life to serve the time that he really deserves. If it's even time that he needs to serve, maybe he just needs to be gone at this point. But we'll see how that turns out. But this is pretty exciting. So apparently Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and MyHeritage all denied that law enforcement officials formally reached out to them about the Golden State Killer case. So that's interesting that they're saying that, and I suspect this might have something to do with them not wanting people to think that, that their DNA is going to be used for what? I don't know, solving crimes? I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? But it's pretty crazy the way that this happened. Here is this guy. Oh, you guys can't see my whole screen. What is going on here? Let's see if we can move this over a bit. I don't know why this is coming off. Well, that's what half of his face looks like. Why is this site acting so funny? Let's do this. Let's see if this helps at all. There we go. I don't know why this thing is cropping the way that it is, but this is a guy right here. They got him. The Golden State suspect, known for cursing angry outbursts, say neighbors who called him freak. Big surprise on that one. Idea for new TV procedural CBS cold case, the DNA files. That's brilliant. Noisy, you should call CBS right now. And don't tell them the whole idea, but see if you can. Actually, you should. I take it back. You should contact Netflix because they will make a series out of anything, and that's actually a great idea. I never see Zach from Jerry Rig Everything asking for help nor dumping one of his dissected phones. What? Hold on, Johnny. You lost me on that one. I never see Zach from Jerry Rig asking for help nor dumping one of his dissected phones. Help or dumping his dissected phones. Yeah, I don't know. I'm always curious about how that works. Also, obviously, most YouTubers have to buy the phones that they break. The people who do like the destruction channels. What is the one I'm looking? Tech Rax is like the king of that. Like he destroys everything, and obviously he's making money off YouTube. I'm sure he has other streams of revenue, but there are smaller channels that I really wonder about. Where they're destroying phones because these are like $500, $600, $700 phones, and even if they're cloud locked or something like that, you're still spending some money on those. So I don't know the answer to that one. I have been tested from 23andMe for one of those ancestry DNA. Are they going to share my genetic profile outside of the scientific research purpose? Johnny Chang said. And I would assume yes. If you have your DNA in a database, that it is going to be used for a number of things. I would think it's safe to assume that, especially if we know that these are being used to solve crimes, they're not going to go and say, hey, can we see the DNA of the people who, signed a waiver that said that we can use it. I'm sure they're going in and saying, hey, we have a warrant, or we have a subpoena, or we have something, some sort of legal document that says we need to be able to search the DNA database and track someone down. So I would assume yes, supposedly only if 23andMe get a court order for your information. Well, what if they get a court order for unidentified DNA and they don't know whose information it is that they're looking for? They'd have to be able to scan through that DNA database and find out what matches. I would think, again, I am just an amateur here, so this is my best guess. But I would assume that that's what had to happen with this guy because they had no idea of where to look. All they had was the DNA from a very old case. This happened a long time ago. So to be able to track him down, you would assume that they had access to the entire database of, whichever one of these companies or companies or several companies that they were checking with. I would think so. Maybe they buy non-functioning phones on eBay and break them. Probably. The funny thing is I saw at least one phone from a YouTuber who destroyed them advertised on eBay, and it was completely trashed. Like, it was destroyed beyond repair. There was nothing you could do useful with this phone. And they were selling it on eBay as is, saying this phone was used for a video demonstration where we destroyed it. It sold for parts not working, obviously, and it was literally like almost in multiple pieces. And I assume someone bought it. I never went to check back. I think one must have the right to have those archives removed and nuked as well. Sorry, let me try to read this again. I think one must have the right to have those archives removed and nuked, as was with one initiative from Google to return null on any subject which doesn't want to appear on the internet. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, they had the thing, it's called right. It was something in Europe, I want to say, right? When it came to Google, it was like the right to disappear or something like that, where some guy, people had gone onto Google and said a bunch of bad things about him, and anytime you Googled his name, that came up, and he did win that case, right? So Google had to kind of pull that out of their search engine, or out of their, wherever it is that they were looking for search results. But I mean, that doesn't remove you from the internet. That removes you from Google search specifically, which, obviously is the go-to for most people. The case used an open source where people post their DNO profile for the public to search if they want. Really? Okay, that's good to know, Greg. I was curious about that. I kind of assumed that they would scan through everything that's on file, but this is from a public. Do you have a link for that, Greg? I'm curious to read that. My camera, Johnny said, your camera make you look purple when you lean back and away. Check for yourself. Oh, great. Okay, so my camera obviously is acting freaky today, so let's see what that looks like. I'm actually frozen on my screen, so let me go back here and take a look. So when I lean back, it's got to have to do with my lighting then, or the fact that I'm wearing a blue shirt, which probably was a bad choice. Come on. Okay, so I'm leaning back, I'm going forward. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I'm sure nobody came here really to watch me, though. It's probably, I assume it's more about the content. So sorry if the camera looks funny. I will try to fix this later on. I'm having a bunch of stuff, and I'm really kind of rebuilding this whole thing around my new workbench and a number of other things. I don't know why I would look purple. Let's see. Maybe if we adjust these just a hair. Now you got me thinking about it. Okay, does that make any difference at all? Wow, you know what? I can see in my software that I look different when I lean back. Like, this looks more natural, and maybe that's just me. And it seems like when I get closer, I'm a little more washed out because of the forward makes me purple. Okay, yeah, so I see what you're saying. It's a little too much light too close. So if you guys can hear me, I'll try not to get so close to the camera, and maybe that'll help. I don't know. Anyhow, Trump administration is pushing hard for smartphone backdoors. All right, we kind of knew this, right? So, we live in a day and age where there are dangerous people that need to be stopped before they act. And if you guys didn't hear, they just caught a kid very recently, I think it was yesterday, who had been dealing with an undercover agent, thought that he was dealing with someone who represented ISIS, and had been watching their recruitment videos, and that's about it. So this was going to be like a lone wolf. The kid was like 17 years old, and he was planning to shoot up a mall. He bragged about how he was going to experience some level of something with, whatever it was that he was fighting for, or thought he was fighting for. And they caught him because they had someone go in and pose as the person who was his contact with an ISIS or whatever. So, I get this. We want to stop these attacks before they happen. If you guys didn't see, there's so much crazy stuff that's going on. And I keep remembering because I just don't have enough to squeeze it in. I can't really squeeze it into this hour, but they're working on a machine that you aim at vehicles and it shuts them down like almost instantaneously. And I don't think it's EMP. I want to say it's a microwave system that they're using. And they show several demonstrations on everything from a passenger car all the way up to a larger truck, where, if people are going to just go up on the sidewalk and run over pedestrians, we need something that can stop that. And it's kind of cool because they've got this thing designed to where when a car goes over a certain speed or goes outside of the lines, ultimately, I think this is the plan, that they aim this microwave beam at the car and it shuts down everything and the car just doesn't run anymore. So that's kind of exciting, you know, because it's difficult to defend against these really random, I won't say unplanned, but these unknown attacks. You know, they're not documented anywhere. We don't have someone's email that we intercepted or anything. You know, these lone wolf attacks are the really scary ones because you just don't know when they're going to come and where they're coming from. But one of the things that we're hearing is that the current administration wants to have backdoors to smartphones, and this isn't anything new. You know, this whole battle has been going on for a long time. Obviously, the government, law enforcement, they want to be able to track down criminals. They want to be able to conduct effective investigations. And, you know, I think most of all want to be able to intercept these actions before they actually take place. Obviously, that would, you know, in this case would have to rely on some sort of communication beforehand. And I forgot to open up my display again. And I forgot that we had chat here too. So let's do that. And let's click on this one more time. There we go. So no major mistakes so far today. So this is interesting. You know, obviously there's encryption on most of these phones. And one of the things that Apple kind of, you know, can brag about, if you want to say that, is that they take their customers' privacy very seriously. It's difficult to get into an iPhone or iOS in general, although there is a startup who is offering $3 million. So I'm going to tell you guys how you can make $3 million. And all you have to do is create a 0-day exploit for iOS or Mac OS. So, and here's the interesting thing. This company is based out of the United Arab Emirates. It's offering $3 million if you come up with a 0-day exploit. There are additional bounties on Android and Windows. Obviously, Apple is the big one, or iOS or Mac OS, because those are the more difficult to crack. So we've got this going on. And my understanding is that when they achieve this backdoor or exploit, that they will, you know, their biggest customers are going to be governments who want to be able to get into the phone. So we've got on one side of the battle, you know, law enforcement, government, and so forth, trying to break the encryption, trying to be able to get into phones. And on the other side, we have, you know, in many cases, the same people telling us not to buy Chinese phones because they can, you know, basically spy on you. So we're going to create a way to gain access to the backdoor, you know, or create a backdoor into a phone security system. And yet you should watch out because Chinese phones may have a backdoor built into their security system. So I don't know. It's all a little confusing for me. I know what the arguments are, but, you know, it all comes down to the same thing, and that is either something is hackable or it's not. And once it is, it's usually a matter of time before it gets out into public. So I assume that the idea is we break the encryption, we solve a whole bunch of cases, and in the interim, you know, over time, obviously the manufacturers will create an upgraded version of the software that patches that exploit. Then there will be another one of these 0-day rewards going out for anyone who can get into it, and we'll probably continue to play that game. And, you know, to some extent, it's going to allow a few people to profit from it if it happens. So just interesting, though, that, you know, as far as I can tell, the same administration that's pushing for smartphone backdoors is saying don't buy Chinese phones because they might be spying on you. It just seems like irony to me. Shutting down the car won't stop the forward-moving momentum. Well, here's the weird thing. Somehow it does noisy cameras, and I would have to pull up the video to show you. In fact, let me see if I can find it, because I can at least give you guys the link. It was weird, because that was my same question is, you know, really, I suppose the person would have to think fast enough to kind of put the car in neutral, but I don't know if that was effective. It looked like it was really shutting down the entire thing. You know, let's just go to a full-size browser here, because this is going to be way too difficult. So let me add a new tab here, and let's look. I want to say it was on YouTube. I may be wrong, but it was something along the lines of microwave vehicle. It was a microwave vehicle disable. Would probably bring it up, I think. So this is EMP. Where was it? Vehicle mounted active denial system. Darn it. Okay, so it's probably, maybe it wasn't on YouTube. It was probably one of those weird embedded things. But the way they showed it was that you aim this thing at the vehicle, and as soon as you turn it on, it shuts it down. I don't know if it doesn't make sense that it would be able to apply the brakes, right? Because you'd have to have something beyond microwave. You'd have to have some sort of data being sent to the car to tell it to engage the brakes. So I'm not sure how it worked. But They were able to shut them down pretty quick, and it looks like they came to a stop, within a matter of seconds. So I don't know the details. I'll have to do some more research on that. But yeah, it doesn't make sense. It seems like, you would have that forward momentum. At least you could roll a little distance, and that's what we want to stop. Are they going to ban custom encrypted devices with PGP? I don't know. It's a good question, Johnny. Ultimately, I think so. I believe that in the future, there will probably not be any effective method of encryption that anyone will be able to rely on. That's my prediction. It'll probably be a long time before that happens, but eventually I don't think there will be much in the way of privacy, encryption, any of that kind of stuff. And probably best case scenario is that if it does exist, we will have some legislation, for better or for worse, we will probably have some laws that say if you're using PGP or if you're using any sort of encryption that is solid, that there's a problem, that may become some sort of issue, some sort of legal issue. That's my prediction. And it all comes down to public safety, and maybe some would argue, what the powers that be think is the best thing for everyone, arguably. And obviously there will be some exceptions to that. We certainly want to be able to have military secrets, and we certainly want to be able to have things that are not shared with the world. But I believe that over time that becomes more and more challenging, and ultimately, it could be 20, 50 years from now. But at some point in time, I don't think there will be much in the way of privacy. We're already looking at machines that can, on a very simple level, know what people are thinking. People can think of a certain word, and there's a machine that you can attach that will tell the computer can interpret by brainwaves what particular term you're thinking of. So, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting thing. A lot of us probably won't be around by then, but it's going to get weird. That's for sure. There's a similarly dumb device on newer electronic travel log for truckers that will shut down the engine of your truck if you exceed the time allowed to drive based on how long you have your engine being turned on, and is making everyone of the rushing, blazing fast on the highway just to beat the curfew. Wow, that's crazy. I would think that it gives them a warning so they can at least pull over and your truck's not stuck in the middle of the road. That would be a good idea. When you just shut down suddenly the engine, you also lose hydraulic or electric steering assistance, and that can make you crash if you have the steering seized suddenly. Yes, I have a great story for that one. Our current privacy is just going to be in a history textbook after 50 years. I agree, Johnny. Certainly things will change, and, no matter what the reasons are, I believe it's inevitable, that privacy worldwide will go away as we know it in the near future, within the next 50 years. I agree with that completely. When you talk about shutting down a car and losing hydraulic pressure and losing power assist and that kind of thing, I just got rid of it. I had an old Lincoln, which is a pretty good sized car. It was a Mark 8. It wasn't like Grandpa Lincoln, but it was a sport coupe. But many will still say it was an old man's car. Anyways, I love this car. It was a V8. It was solid. It was power everything. It was a 94, and it had features on it that some cars today still don't have, and everyone should have. No one should have to manually turn their headlights on and off. I believe mine was doing that automatically since 94, and as a result, every time I drive a car that doesn't turn its headlights off automatically, I forget to turn them off. But anyways, I digress. So this car, one of the things that was wrong with it, and I've referenced this a couple times in my videos, it should have been recalled over numerous issues. One is that the headlights looked terrible after a couple years of use. The compartment was too small for the heat generated by the headlights, and it would fade the plastic on the outside, and pretty soon it was like you were driving by candlelight. That was only one of the problems. The other one was that when the alternator on this vehicle failed, which it would every 60 to 75,000 miles, it would fail immediately. So you would be driving, your alternator would quit, and you would lose power within 30 seconds to the steering, to the brakes, the AC, the power windows, everything just would quit all at once. So I had the good fortune of coming down a very winding path on a hill, a winding road that was going downhill with super, like it would be fun to ride on a motorcycle or a sports car on this road. I had just made it to the bottom of the hill when my alternator failed, and with it, my power brakes and my power steering. And if you're driving a large vehicle, you know, it takes some muscle to steer and to stop that car. And I can only imagine that had I still been up on that hill going around a curve, it would have been very difficult to navigate, you know, at 50, 60 miles an hour. So I think I was very lucky on that one. And that was a terrible problem with that car that they really should have done a recall over, but they never did because they stalled long enough to pretty much wait until, you know, the car wasn't really even being driven by too many people anymore. No suicide doors on that Lincoln. No, if I had one of those, I definitely would have kept it. But that car, you know, arguably was a suicide vehicle anyways. It was terrible on wet surfaces. It handled great on dry roads. I mean, it would outperform anything in its class on a dry road when it came to cornering. But I shouldn't say, well, I should say in its class because it was a sports luxury coupe. Okay, so, you know, I would put it against, probably not Lexus in any case. All right, I'm talking it up more than it was. But it was, I loved the car, but it had so many problems. Couldn't handle wet roads. Alternator would die, like, and you literally had seconds before your whole car wasn't running anymore. The headlight issue. What was the other problem with it? Oh, and of course the airbags, because if you've ever seen a Lincoln that has an air ride suspension system, then you've almost definitely seen part or the entire vehicle slam to the ground like it was a lowrider, and that was because those airbags would just get old, dry up, and develop leaks, and then you go out in the morning, your car would be sitting on the ground. You have to pump it back up, and then my compressor finally failed eventually, but they towed it away as it is. Anyways, man, but the suicide doors, that I would have liked to have. All right, friends, I am going to get out of here shortly at 7:02. I was going to answer some questions. Let's see, I actually had a couple of things. That was a zero-day exploit comment here. I had a comment here that I thought was interesting, and this was on a Galaxy Note 3 screen replacement that I did. So keep in mind that most of the people who watch my tutorials don't work on phones for a living. So usually I'll be answering some very basic, straightforward questions, you know, as far as like, how do you get a strip screw out of this? And, you know, I turned it on and now my microphone doesn't work. So this comment from Dale Cook says, after he completed his Galaxy Note 3 screen replacement, iPhone has 6 screws and the screen is replaced. Good video, but I won't be buying a Samsung based on the stupidity of the way they are built. Samsung need to realize that screens are the most common thing to break on any phone and make their phones easier to get the screens replaced. And to that, I want to say, Dale Cook, I agree with you if you compare this Galaxy Note 3 to something like, I don't know, an iPhone 5 or an iPhone 6. However, I would encourage you to take a look at an iPhone 7 repair video or an iPhone 4 or 4S video, and certainly an iPhone 10, and see if you don't feel differently. And one of the things about it is there's usually more than 6 screws involved. We've also got to transfer over the hardware from the display to the replacement part, so you know they can be a little more time consuming than that. If you're dealing with something like an iPhone 8 or an iPhone 10, you might find that you have a number of problems after you swap the screens over. So unfortunately, Samsung hasn't gotten any easier, obviously, because now we have OLED screens that are very difficult to remove without breaking, so getting your core exchange value back if you're going to send that thing in is questionable at best. And everything's glued together now because we all have to be water resistant and not easy to service, even when it comes to the battery. So that's ridiculous. So anyways, friends, unless anyone else has something to add, I'm going to get back to work. I've got a few things to knock out here, some videos coming up pretty soon. I want to say thank you all again for joining me. I will be back next Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Of course, Thursday, again, 6 p.m. right here. Until further notice, because I may change some things around, and also rebranding coming very soon. So if you're used to Go Cell Phone Repair, I'm going to keep that website for support as far as parts and tools and things go like that. But when it comes to YouTube, obviously I've got to go beyond phone repair because there's so much more interesting stuff out there to do and to talk about. So hey, good seeing you all. Take care. Have a great evening, and I will catch you next time.